The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Breaking humanity, one soul at a time. This is the World You Don't Know radio show with your host, Nick O'Connell.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome along to this week's edition of The World You Don't Know with myself, Mick O'Connell. Now, I do have a guest coming on. I'm trying to dial him on Skype at the moment and I'm still trying to connect. I've got Vincent Byrne from People's Internet Radio coming on, and we're going to be discussing what I consider to be a very serious subject indeed. We're going to be discussing the Constitution and the dwelling and whether it's protected or not by the Constitution, although it's supposed to be. If you look at Article 40.5, the dwelling is inviolable save in accordance with law. But the problem is that when people are getting evicted from their homes, the banks and the courts are not referring to people's homes as dwellings. They're referring to them as properties, as premises, as anything but a dwelling. So I'm hoping to get Vin on now. Unfortunately, the thing didn't connect. I'm going to try and connect again. Maybe I'll go to a song now in a minute or so to see will it connect. I'm dialing it now and I'll see what happens. And usually Vin has a very good internet connection, but if he doesn't, I can always revert to the phone. I can get him to call in, and he will. Because it would suit him actually to probably use the phone. So I'll try to Skype again. If Skype doesn't work, what I'll do is I'm going to queue up a song and we'll try and get him on via the phone. So I'll see what happens. Just bear with me for a moment or two, and I'll see will it connect. I don't think it will though on Skype. He is trying, but nothing's happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a song, folks, and I'll try and get Finn to call me on the phone, and I might have a bit more success that way. So bear with me, folks. I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, I have got Vin on the phone, so I'm going to see what happens now when I go to the phone. So just bear with me for a second. Good evening, Vin. Are you there?
I am, Mick. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear, Vin. Yes, indeed, I can indeed. So we'll use the phone for now, Vin, because obviously Skype is not working. And I do prefer Skype, because sometimes you get a very good signal with Skype, but unfortunately there's nothing we can do. Now, listen, Vin, thanks very much for coming on at short notice again. I mean, I didn't give you a hell of a lot of notice to come on, but thanks very much for coming on.
No problem, you're more than welcome.
That's great, Vin. Thanks very much. And thanks for that promo earlier on. I had to listen to it there about a half an hour ago. It was very nice what you said about me at the start of it, so thanks very much for that. But listen, we're going to be talking about the dwelling, and the reason I wanted to get you on is because I have been following your posts for the last few weeks on Facebook, and I've been following what's been going on over in the courts as well in relation to a certain eviction up in Balbriggan, and then another case I was following them, which I'm sure you followed yourself, was that criminal case where the word dwelling was actually used in the case. So, you know, the Constitution does supposedly offer some protection in relation to the dwelling, but not when it comes to evictions.
Well, you would think that, or at least you could be led to believe that that's how it is, according to, one, what's happening, and two, if you were to listen to the mainstream media. I mean, I'm not knocking the mainstream media in that sense, but the legal, because they just don't appear to know. But the legal system, they definitely know this, and so do the judges. They absolutely know, and I'm sure many of the politicians also know. For them to be this ignorant of the Constitution, quite frankly, it's borderline treason, and I don't use that word lightly.
Say that again, borderline treason.
If it's not actual treason, it's as close to treason as you can get, in my opinion.
I mean, they know. I mean, the wording of that Constitution is very specific, Vin. It says dwelling in Article 40.5. The word dwelling is actually mentioned several times in the Constitution, as you've said yourself plenty of times. So why are the courts ignoring the word dwelling? Why are they referring to people's homes as properties and premises?
Right, here's what they're doing. So they're not using the word dwelling. When most people go in to sign for their dwelling, originally, when they're buying a house or a home or whatever, most people don't realise that their very own solicitor fills in the term dwelling house and premises on the documents that they sign when they're originally signing for the loan, you see?
Right.
And now, that's not always the case. I have had somebody who said to me that theirs actually has the word dwelling on it and home. Now, that was a bit of a shock. However, that's the only one I've ever heard of. And what's happening is, when people end up in courtrooms, there's a series of presumptions takes place, Mick. And part of this series of presumptions will stand because presumptions stand legally if they've never been rebuked or revoked or rescinded.
Right.
And people don't realise this, of course. People don't have generally, people who are struggling to pay mortgages, let's face it, most of us would be, well, I'm going to use the English term, middle class, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I mean, and you're right in saying middle class, because, I mean, most, working class people who are in dead-end jobs couldn't afford a mortgage even if they wanted to get one anyway.
Well, I mean, I know an awful lot of working class people. I mean, I consider myself working class. I had that position, But, I mean, middle class, working class, once you're mortgaged, essentially, this affects you. And what it means is that the courts, solicitors, and your so-called bank or lender or vulture fund are treating you as if you're essentially a business. Now, there was an interesting case there recently, as I'm sure many of your listeners are aware, with Ben Gilroy in relation to that so-called eviction out in Balbriggan, where they attached him as a full party, it seems, to the action. And when he tried to defend himself in the action, they started to pull all sorts of fancy manoeuvring, shall we say. And they were trying to say, well, regardless of what they were trying to say, but Ben was trying to make the point to them that this was an Article 40.5 dwelling that all this related to. And Judge Baker, I believe, said, I have no evidence in this court here today that this is a dwelling, that it's not a premises. Now, that indicates, number one, had she known, or had she evidence in front of her that it was a dwelling, she would have had to treat the matter differently, number one. And number two, it also made me look very, very close at the wording they're using, because by using the deceptive term premises and dwelling house, they're effectively implying that there's a business going on. Now, normally when businesses go into trouble like this, they can't pay mortgages or whatever, the banks put in place receivers. You see? Now, no receiver was put in place here. So it's indicative that it's not a business because nobody put a receiver in place. And the reason they don't put receivers in place, of course, is receivers can't go and take dwellings. Now, as you know, I, of course, rang the county sheriff's office and I asked him very abruptly and directly if he was the sheriff of County Dublin, was he constrained by the 1937 Constitution? He said he was.
And did he tell you what part of that Constitution constrains him?
Well, I asked him, was he constrained by it, which is all of it.
Right.
You see? Now, he essentially, in his affidavit, admitted to breaching the dwelling. Now, while I'm sure they don't realise, at least he doesn't seem to realise, the significance of what it was he actually did. But sooner or later, he's going to have to find out. Now, I put some posts up on my Facebook page there earlier today. I don't know if did you get a chance to have a look at them?
I didn't, Vin, no. I was a bit busy today now, so...
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll read through some of these.
Yeah, do.
Because these are very significant. Anybody listening really needs to pay attention to these. And if you want to see them on my Facebook page, just look for Vincent Byrne on Facebook, and you'll see my profile pic there. I'm sitting on the Game of Thrones Iron Throne with the crown and sword in my hand.
Great picture, by the way.
Thank you. Okay, so here's one, for example. However, the Supreme Court has stated that entry into the dwelling itself is a completely different matter. The burden lies upon the entrant to prove that the inviolability of that dwelling has not been breached. Now, that's a very, very significant matter right there. And that implies that the sheriff is the one who has the burden because he's the one who breached the dwelling. Now, the sheriff, of course, claims he's done this in accordance with law. And of course, as we all know, down through the years we've been researching this, that the Constitution mentions different types of law. It mentions positive law, and it mentions law. Anytime we see law, it seems always to relate to, actually hurting somebody, injury, a criminal, what we'd call a criminal or felonious act. And anywhere they mention positive law, if you look up the direct literal translation of Bunreacht here in 1937, you'll see very clearly in Article 41.11, for example, positive law is defined as human statutes. And essentially, we are, as a family, superior, and we have superior and antecedent rights to all. Now, can you explain, I understand what the word superior means, but just for my listeners, can you explain what the word antecedent means, Vin, exactly? Existing prior to. Right. It's a fancy word for before. Okay. Yeah, we've had to. No, you're right to do that because I know you know what it means, but we tend to get used to this legal speak after a while, and it's not great to.
See, now I've read the book, A Study of the Irish Text, as I'm sure you have as well, Vin, and Article 41.1.1 in particular. I mean, it jumps off the page at me. The literal translation of that. It's such a powerful. Wording, the way it's worded, it's very, very powerful because it puts you above every single so-called law in this country as a family.
Yeah, now there was another, let me just read out another one of these posts on my Facebook page. This was from another little clip I picked earlier from a book. It says, secondly, it appears that housing provided under direct provision accommodation can be included in the definition of a dwelling. Hogan J., that's a judge, held that it was important to stress that Article 40.5 applies to every home in the state. And I'm saying that, Mick, because I've had a lot of people ask me about, well, where do I stand if I'm a tenant, or if I'm renting, or if I'm living in a hotel room, for example.
What is the dwelling? What does it define what the dwelling actually is?
Well, he has just said it's every home in the state.
So whatever you consider your home, you can call that your dwelling.
Well, essentially, it's where you sleep at night.
Yeah.
You see, because and this is like an old jurisprudence that developed down through the years, because when man or woman, when we're asleep, we're essentially defenceless.
Yeah.
So the dwelling where you sleep, in other words, is held as sacrosanct because you're off guard.
Yeah.
Essentially. You're more vulnerable.
Right. And would that include, I mean, if where you sleep at night is considered your dwelling under the Constitution,
absolutely,
would that not include every doorway that every homeless person has to sleep in?
Essentially, it would do, yeah.
I mean, that's my thinking of it anyway, Vin, you know?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a strange one.
Here's another something from constitutional law and constitutional rights in Ireland. To enter private property against the will of the owner and there arrest the owner, express provisions should have been made for such a power. Down the bottom it says, the constitutional protection applies only to dwellings and not to other lands and premises. You see?
And did they define what a premises actually is?
A premises is actually, it's a business premises.
A place of business.
Yeah, well, premise means, a presupposed idea in advance of view of something else, but it became known as, because it was the presumption that it was a business, a commercial activity, in other words. Dwelling house, when you see dwelling house on your documents, a dwelling house is something that's capable of being a dwelling, or something that's rented out, say, by the room, by the night, like a motel or a hotel. Dwelling house is not dwelling. The Constitution is very, very specific.
How do you mean the dwelling house is not a dwelling? Well, what is a dwelling house?
A dwelling house is something like a hotel. You see, it's only the room you rent would be your dwelling for that night, Mick.
Would that apply then to I privately rent, Vin? Would that apply to me then, or would I have the same constitutional protection as someone who owns the home?
Absolutely, and I'll tell you why. Because that case that I cited earlier on, okay, where he said it was. Let me just get back to it. Yeah. Where the burden lies upon the entrant to prove the inviolability of that dwelling has not been breached. That was a situation where a guy, Tariq Omar is his name, you can look up the case if you want, folks, Tariq Omar, and he was a foreign national, and he was here with his good lady wife, and they had a child. They gave birth to a child here, so the child was an Irish citizen. But they weren't, and there was deportation papers drawn up for them, and the Garda Síochána went and knocked on it was a rented dwelling they had. It was, government-provided rented dwelling, essentially, that they were paying for out of their social welfare or something like that. Some type of thing was in place. And the Gardaí knocked on the door, and they opened up, and they invited them in. But then the Gardaí switched into something else and went and arrested them for deportation, drove them to Dublin Airport. And it was all deemed to be a breach of Article 40.5. Now, if it covers them, I'm going to tell you it covers you.
Right. I mean, that's very interesting, Evan. Very, very interesting.
But again, we have these cases now, you see. So we have case law here. So, I mean, I've been saying for years, look, I'm not making this stuff up. I'm not one of these armchair solicitor types. I don't give advice to people. I only talk about what I see that they have written in their material. Now, I'm not suggesting that people don't have to pay mortgages or anything like that, Mick. Because they, for example, if somebody were to try that, right, this so-called strategic defaulting you hear about, is nonsense. I've never heard of anybody doing that. Even if they can't take you from the dwelling, they could garnish your wages. That means they can, literally force your employer to pay them before they pay you the remainder. They could really make life hell for you. But you'd have a roof over your head. You tried to live on the street in Ireland. That family that were evicted in Balbriggan unlawfully and illegally, I might add, in my opinion, they were evicted into the snow.
Yeah, I remember it.
Into the snow.
I mean, that was disgusting what happened there.
That's not attempted murder, I don't know what is.
It was attempted murder, then, because if those people hadn't have got the help that they got that day and they were out in the street, they could have froze to death that night, without a doubt.
And the people who showed up were incredible, and they're worthy. I could talk about them in many regards, but again, there's other things happening in the background there. So even the family themselves have to keep stum at the moment. I hope a lot of people appreciate that. But I'm going to tell you that they were very thankful for all that assistance those people gave, because it was fantastic. Because the people who were apparently supposed to uphold their constitutional rights that day seemed to fail to do so.
Well, I mean, from what I see, I seen the video of that gentleman getting dragged out of that house, and he fell to the ground as far as I can see.
Well, he was tripped and thrown to the ground.
And the guards were across the street standing there watching this.
He was knocked out cold, and the ambulance was called, and then a fire brigade was called down.
And what did the guards do? Nothing at all.
Well, I'm going to say, in fairness to the guards now, they had a very difficult situation to deal with that day, and they did appear to, as far as I can tell, they did appear to uphold their oaths in that sense. So I don't see any issue with what the Gardaí did specifically, but what the Sheriff's Office did, as far as I can tell, he's in deep doo-doo. He's in deep trouble from what I can see, and the KBC Bank and the hired goons, which is the best term I can come up for them.
Black and tans is what they wear.
Well, yeah, I won't disagree with you. But they absolutely did not have even the shadow of a right to do that. Everybody needs to understand, when a company comes to Ireland to do business, they are doing, and it's written on their documents, that any disputes arise will be dealt with under Irish law. That means they've accepted the Constitution of Ireland. That means they've accepted Article 40.5, that the dwelling is inviolable save in accordance with law. That does not mean positive law. Positive law, civil matters. In other words, positive law are civil matters. The Gardaí said it was a civil matter that day. Everybody else said it was a civil matter. KBC, the banks, the courts, the works. And yet, a criminal act transpired.
And nothing was done about it by the guards.
But yet nothing was done about it.
I mean, they should have acted straight away. If they see somebody getting assaulted, then that's their job.
They're in a difficult position, but as I said, that door hasn't been bolted shut yet. Let's just say that.
Right.
Okay. So it might be a case of watch this space.
And how is that family now? They're obviously back in their home, aren't they?
Oh, they're still in the dwelling.
Well, that's in their dwelling, and that's what we will call it from here on out, a dwelling.
Well, look, I need to get this across to people. Everybody is acquainted with the term "to the occupier." An occupier is somebody running a business. So if you respond to any mail or anything like that as the occupier, you are telling them that you are not living in a dwelling. So you are not the occupier, you are the dweller. That is who you are. And when you write down your name and so-called address, you should be writing down strikeout address and write dwelling.
Yeah, I mean, even though the word address, Vin, does that have some sort of connotations in...
It does, yes.
In the court system, like...
Well, I'll put it to you this way. If you and I are walking down the street and we see each other and we recognise each other, that's an address. If you recognise me as Vin and I recognise you as Mick, even if we don't say a word to each other, that's an address. If I call you, I have addressed you. That's your name.
Yeah.
See? There's lots of forms of address. What we consider another form of address is your address, 52, Beach Park, whatever, But, yeah, there are many forms of address. That's why the dweller, dwelling in the dwelling, is completely different. The Constitution doesn't mince words with this. I even think that this can be utilised in support of the right to life, which I might add that rights do not come from the Constitution. The Constitution is only supposed to preserve and protect.
That's it, yeah.
And defend the rights we already have. And I would put it out there to your listeners, Mick. Does the child, the unborn, the child, the baby, the zygote, the fetus, call it what you will, these are all terms for a human being at different stages of life, like OAP, like teenager, and like adult male. They're all the same. They're just terminology for a human being. And that child is living, and it's drawing from its mother, as we draw from nature, to survive. So it's a living being, it's doing its best to survive, and it dwells within its mother. It's the dwelling. And I think that the child can the unborn can avail of protection from Articles 40.5, because again, it's in accordance with law. Now, that also means that, for example, if there was an emergency situation where a termination was required to save the life of the mother, that's still okay, because the defence of the dwelling will allow that.
Yeah.
Because you're coming to defend the life of the mother, which is allowed.
Yeah, it's and that's a very, very good point what you just said there, Vin. You know, I
haven't heard anybody else make that point to
me. Yeah, well, I'm not going to disagree with you, Vin. I'm not, how can I? I mean, that's a very good argument that you've just put across there.
Well, you see, Mick, I mean, like you, I mean, maybe, I suppose we should let people know, you and I go back donkey's years.
We do. We got way back to 2009, 2010, Vin.
And you were actually the first individual I ever spoke to about this class of thing on the internet.
Yeah. And that wasn't even on an Irish website. I think it was on a British website, TPUC, if I remember correctly.
TPUC.org, if I'm
yeah.
And we've met since, of course. We've had a few pints together and all that jazz. But I always admired you were such a steady hand at this stuff. You never got excited, which I think is important. You were steady and reliable and solid, and that's what's required. Careful consideration for these things.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, that's it. I don't get involved. It's not that I'm on the fence about anything, Vin. I'm not. You know, I do have my views on everything that's going on in the world. But you know, I'm not going to champion one argument against another and stuff like that. But
I think you have a very good, steady approach, which is important, and I've tried to adopt that myself, to be honest.
Well, I mean, the right to life to me is extremely important, and you know, I'm a big proponent of it.
The right did not come from the government, so how can they therefore somehow decide it's okay for others to take it away?
Yeah, and this is an argument I say to some people as well. Like, I hear people say, no, you know, I have the right under the Constitution, and just like you said a couple of minutes ago, I'd remind them, the Constitution doesn't give you any rights, it just protects the rights you've already got.
Correct.
You know, these are God-given rights, whether you want to believe in God or not, whether you want to believe in a creator or not, we're all born with these inalienable, invincible rights that as long as we don't cause harm, loss or injury to anybody, we can't do anything wrong.
Well, let me read a little one here for you. Here's a little something from Holding the Line. These are just texts that relate to the Constitution. The concept of Irish Constitution, the concept of justice, which is specifically referred to in the preamble to the Constitution in relation to the freedom and the dignity of the individual, appears again in the provisions of Article 34, which deal with the courts. O'Higgins said in his judgment, "It is justice which is to be administered in the courts, and this concept of justice must import not only fairness and fair procedures, but also regard to the dignity of the individual. No court under the Constitution has jurisdiction to act contrary to justice." And what's happening, what we're seeing, is injustice, Mick.
Yeah.
These people, I maintain these people are vacating their office. I've heard people say, oh, it's impossible to get rid of a judge. It's not if they vacate their office. If you point out, say, I don't have to sack you, you have vacated your office. All I have to do is prove it.
But then, and you're right, by them not obeying the Constitution, which they allegedly swear an oath to, now whether they do or not, we don't know.
They do, and they take it serious, most of them.
But there are those out there judges in the courts in this country, Vin, as you well know, are not taking it serious enough. Like they're
going to. As the saying goes, fiat justitia ruit caelum, which is a little Latinism which means let justice be done though the heavens fall. And that was said by the Master of the High Court in an interview with Marion Finucane. And he means it. Here's a little something for you from Costello. This was human positive law, again Irish law. Human positive law must not go contrary to the natural law. If it does, it is a perversion of law. It would follow then that the basic rights which are derived from the precepts of the natural law obtain their validity from that law and not from human positive law, and that they are superior to it.
Yeah, but it'd have to be, because I mean, human positive law, as you pointed out plenty of times, it's just made up gobbledygook.
Well, listen to this, and here's the last line. Any human law which would deprive the human person of them would be a perversion. So we are seeing, I mean, is this not perversions we're seeing here?
It is, Vin. It's absolutely perverted what's going on. Vin, listen, I need to go to a quick break. Do you mind hanging on for a couple of moments?
You work away.
That's brilliant. Folks, we'll be back in 2 minutes with Vin. Talk to us very shortly. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you're very welcome back. The text number is 087 062 7138. But I'm going to go straight back to Vin. Vin, just before the break there, we were talking about, you were saying that a lot of the judges out there do obey the Constitution and want to, be good judges. But unfortunately, there are those out there that they're not. Do you think?
Okay, I mean, for the time being, we are going to correct all that bad conduct. We are going to do it because we, the people, have no option but to do it, Nick. So we're going to do it.
And how do you think it's going to come about, though, Vin? I see people like, Joe Ducey, for example. He put it up to them, and he was basically bringing it to their door. And
I'm going to say, I mean, as much as I admire Joe Ducey, and I actually quite like Joe Ducey, I know the man. I've talked to him many times. But I'm going to say, Mick, he went about it, in my opinion, the wrong way.
Well, that's what I think as well. And he put himself, in a bad position, unfortunately.
I don't like the way he used language. I think people have to start using a very direct and authoritative passive tone.
And do you think they'll listen, the powers that be?
They have to. They have no choice, and here's why. Because if they completely discard the Constitution and make it redundant, all bets are off, Mick. You know what I'm saying?
But haven't they done that anyway? Haven't they made the Constitution redundant, Vin?
No, they've been pushing it, I suppose. But here's why they get away with it. You were asking how they get away with it. They get away with it because the general population are unaware. And what I want to do is I want to start educating the population. First and foremost, everybody please buy a copy of the Little Blue Book Constitution, even though it is watered down, and we can explain that another time. But even that alone, buy it and read it. Particularly the fundamental rights, Articles 40 onwards.
I mean, if you look at what's going on in Ireland at the moment, 10,000 people homeless, over 4,000 of them children living in hotel rooms and other, what I would call substandard dwellings. They're not proper homes, they're not proper dwellings.
You're correct, they're not.
Right, and most people say, the government are incompetent bunch of buffoons. I don't see it that way. I look at this as pure policy, Vin.
It's not incompetence. I wish it was incompetence.
I think it's policy.
It's an intent. It's a direct intention. But I'm going to say this. There are how many hundreds of thousands of empty houses in Ireland, which those people, as far as I'm concerned, and I was a builder, I built a lot of these houses for people, they can go in and use them. They can use them as dwellings, and we the people have to start supporting them in their endeavours to do so. They need to, as Harry from We the People always said, they need to go in, clean up the place, make it nice, put some electricity in, maybe plant a garden, some fruit and veg to sustain them on the planet, fresh water, etc., and get the place nice. There has been a court case in Ireland where a man did just that over in Galway, and he's still in that dwelling today.
I mean, I've heard of people, Vin. I remember a case here in Dublin. It was, I think it's something to do with Marion Finucane, if I'm not mistaken. There was these apartments that she'd had down on Mespil Road,
right,
and they wanted to sell the apartments and stuff like that. And there was an elderly lady who had lived in one of these apartments for 19 plus years, and under some Irish law, she was entitled to keep that apartment.
Probably once you're over, there's certain things. She may have had an equitable interest over a certain period of time develops. That's legality, okay? Which is all well and good. Most of the legality that's out there, people tend to read it and think it says one thing when regularly it means something quite different. Even the legal eagles themselves will tell you that. But here's a little something I want to talk about. Use of force. The Gardaí on Garda Síochána, the guardians of the peace. You'll regularly hear them referred to now in the media, and the different ministers, Noreen O'Sullivan was always doing this, calling them the Garda force. And you see, that itself, calling our good Garda Síochána the Garda force, that's a despicable act on her behalf. That's a disgraceful...
Yeah, because they're not a force, are they?
No, they're not a force.
Peacekeepers.
They're not even police.
Yeah, and this is another thing I have a problem with as well, that this policing authority of Ireland.
Yeah, they're not police.
Yeah, we don't have the police in this country. We have on Garda Síochána, guardians of the peace. And
they understand the Constitution, believe it or not, the Gardaí, regular Gardaí, understand it better, it seems, than the politicians. Because if they didn't, Mick, half of what I've talked about would have been impossible. I mean, I've had situations myself here, as I'm sure many of you have seen the videos, for example, over that so-called senseless, some people call it the census. And, you know, it's one of those things, but I decided to not volunteer. It was that simple. I decided, I didn't feel like volunteering to do this voluntary act. And, of course, they threw the book at me, so to speak. And eventually ended up a Gardaí knocking on my door, and I just simply did not open up. And they left. Now, they knocked quite a few times. They were quite insistent. But eventually, they left. Now, the Gardaí know that any time they breach the dwelling, they are in trouble, unless it's in accordance with law. So, for example...
Yeah, they need a lawful excuse to go in.
Well, if somebody is mugging a granny and they run into a dwelling and they lock the door, the Gardaí, and with the support of all the people, will say, go ahead, kick that door in, like that's going back out.
And that is fair enough. No one has I wouldn't have a problem with that one bit, Finn.
You cannot breach the dwelling if, for example, you haven't paid your parking tickets.
Because they're civil matters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, what's happening is there's a conscious effort, it seems, to blur those lines between the civil and the criminal jurisdictions. And essentially what's happening is it's all becoming criminal. And they are treating people like they are criminals. But it's different. I often hear them reference, well, it's similar to England or similar to France or similar to Germany, and they look for parity and similarity. Those jurisdictions have a completely different outlook on the status of the people in the country. The status of the Irish people, whether they like it or not, is that we are sovereign. It says so in the Constitution. Now, I know a lot of people might balk at that, and they say, oh, that's just popular sovereignty. But that can't be true, because you can't have a prison full of people and call them, say, collectively they are, part of the free society of the prison, and yet individually they're prisoners.
Yeah, I get you, yeah.
So we are not collectively sovereign, or we are collectively sovereign, but we are also individually sovereign, individually sovereign as well. And that doesn't mean we're royalty. It doesn't mean I get to call myself a king. It means there is no man or woman above or beneath me.
Exactly, we're all equal.
I am above and beneath no other. It's absolute equality. That's what it is. And equality of outcome, not equality, not forced equality.
I mean, these people who wrote that constitution, Vin, they weren't stupid people. Fair enough, they were probably legal eagles and barristers and stuff like that, because of the way it's worded and stuff like that.
De Valera takes an awful lot of slack down through the years, but in fairness to De Valera at the time, and I was no fan of De Valera, I can assure you, but the men he engaged to write up the 37 Constitution, Hearn and a few others, they really seemed to know their apples and their onions. Even the religious people who had an input, the things that they put in for like example, the sanctity of life. I mean, you'll hear people today in the 8th debate saying that, oh, look, there we are, controlled by the Catholic Church. But that's not control. If the Catholic Church are trying to preserve the life of the very people of the nation, how can that be a bad thing?
Yeah, it's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. I mean, I'm not, I'll put it this way, I spent my knees all day Easter Sunday, but I was tiling the kitchen floor. So, but, I mean, these things are important. The concepts are important. It's not about whether you do or don't believe in God. It's the concept. And they all have to adhere to that concept, whether they like it or not. So we, the people, need to get organised. We need to start, when I say organised, I mean we need to get organised and educate ourselves. There's no point in forming a big posse or a big protest group, in my opinion, until the people actually understand what it is they're doing.
Yeah.
When they understand what it is they're doing, how to operate accordingly, there won't be any protest, because people will put pen to paper and they will inform the bank in advance, the sheriffs, the solicitors, the courts, the judges, the politicians, all the relevant ministers. They will send them all an identical letter, CC, carbon copy every single one of them, where they will let them know in advance, this is my dwelling, known as number 22, whatever the hell it is. This is my constitutionally protected dwelling. The wording needs to be done up correctly. Anybody who's in trouble needs to inform their bank that they need to correct the mispresumption. They need to correct their record, as it were.
Because the banks are presuming you're living in a premises.
Yeah.
And they're not mentioning the word dwelling, so they go into court and asking...
They should be appointing receivers, and they don't, you see. So it isn't... as I say, they're operating in the shadows here, Mick. They're trying to pull fast ones.
Yeah, but this is what the game is with them, though. It's total deception.
Any family, I would support this. Any family that have been evicted, I would absolutely support them returning to their dwelling, whether you were a single man, single woman, children, whatever. I would absolutely support every single family that was ejected from a dwelling going back in.
I mean, this is the thing as well. You're saying that there's been literally thousands of families evicted from their homes over the last few years
they all need
in this country. And here's the problem, though, Vin. All these houses still lie idle, don't they? Most of them lie idle.
Let's say they even break the Constitution. They breach the Constitution because you see, an unlawful eviction is no eviction at all. There is eviction as a rule is not allowed in Ireland. I mean, I keep telling people, if you look at the so-called eviction bill everybody talks about, it doesn't say the word eviction in it. It doesn't say the word premises, but the word dwelling is riddled through it like pixie dust.
When the courts are granting an order for possession, are they granting like an eviction order? Does it say the word eviction on it, or is it an order for possession?
It's an order for possession.
And that means then that the person that lives in that house, in that dwelling, has to voluntarily hand over that.
Correct.
So if they just put their head out the door and say, feck off, you're not taking the house, and shut the door in their face.
Well, they don't even have to say that in theory. They could just
ignore the knock on the door.
It peacefully, like the family in Balbriggan did. They just sat peacefully, and the man in the house, I believe, was sitting down reading the Bible. And they picked him up and dragged him out, and he was knocked out cold on the street. And
that there is a criminal act.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the breach of the dwelling, as soon as they begin to drill the locks,
that's when the criminal
I'll put it this way.
Begins,
you ever hear of a snapping turtle?
A snapping turtle, yeah.
Yeah. You take a drill to a snapping turtle's shell and see what it does to you.
Right. Well, what would happen? I've never done it.
To that snapping turtle, that's its dwelling.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
You see? And you try and drill your way in through there, and that turtle will let you know in no uncertain terms exactly what's what.
Yeah, it'll bite the finger off you.
Yeah, now I'm not suggesting we the people do that, but what I'm suggesting is, I mean, if it's absolutely necessary, I don't see why there should be an issue. Because there's a very interesting piece of legislation, the defence of the dwelling.
Yes, and this is what I was going to mention next about that court case a few weeks ago where a gentleman went into his mobile home on a halting site and discovered somebody, or a couple of people I think it was, in his bedroom.
Yeah.
And he took a half of a garden shears to him, and unfortunately the man died. Yeah. And he had a very cogent defence that he was defending his dwelling, and he was acquitted.
He was acquitted in minutes.
And that's a very, very important case.
Now, you see, a dwelling is also, if you're using it as a dwelling, it's your car. If you're using it as a dwelling, it's a van, it's a tent, it's a boat, it's whatever. If you're using it as a dwelling, and it's about usage here, if you're using it as a dwelling, then, according to the Constitution, it's sacrosanct.
Yeah, so if you've got a tent pitched up in the Phoenix Park and someone tries to enter that tent and you do what that man in Killock did...
Well, to be honest, I was also going to suggest at one stage that, I put the idea, if you will, out there, and I'll put it out there again, that if we hear of one more unlawful, illegal, forced eviction in this country, really I think we the people should all en masse show up to the Phoenix Park and symbolically evict Michael D. Higgins.
Well, if they can do it, we can do it.
No, I'm not saying we actually physically evict him. I understand. I want to be absolutely
clear.
Symbolically.
No, we understand what you mean, Vin. Yeah.
We should call for him to be evicted. Yeah.
You know, you mentioned Michael D. Higgins. I find it ironic. I remember a video of him in Galway a few years ago where he said the resources of the land of Ireland belong to the people and the people alone. Didn't take him long to change his bloody mind, did it?
Didn't seem to.
No. Well, listen, Vin, I need to go to my last ad, so do you mind hanging on just for another moment? Folks, I'm going to be back in a couple of minutes with Vin B. Talk to you very shortly. Folks, you're very welcome back. The text number is 08706271138. That's 08706271138. You can also check out the Facebook page. It's called The World You Don't Know. You can check out Vin's page, People's Internet Radio, or just look for Vincent Byrne on Facebook, and some of his posts are very, very interesting posts indeed. I'm going to go straight back to Vin. And how are you, Vin? Listen, I've got about 10 minutes left. Now, just before the break there, I was talking about Michael D. Higgins and his quick turnabout, I suppose, from 20 odd years ago, where he was saying that the resources of the land of Ireland belong to the people and the people alone. But as I said, he wasn't long about changing his mind. What do you think turned him? Do you think when you get into an office of such a position that there's people over and above him who would be telling him, listen, you do this or you're out in your ear?
Well, I don't think we'll ever know one way or the other.
Right.
And I generally don't really get involved in that type of thing. I usually say, look, we'll never know the truth of that thing anyway. We'll never get to the end of that. So, what I say is we can get to the end of what's in front of us here. For example, the family. I'm suggesting that, the Constitution suggests that the family is the highest, most protected entity in the country. And they say it's based upon marriage. Now, I've seen them try to pull a fast one on people in courts where they say, oh, you're not married, therefore you're not family, therefore you're not entitled to this constitutional protection.
Yeah.
And that's bunk. Because if your mother and father were married, and if your great-granny was married, and your great-great-granny was married, you're family.
So as long as there's a marriage somewhere within the family, you have some sort of constitutional protection. I mean, we see in this country, particularly in the family courts, a lot of single fathers who seem to be getting shafted left, right and centre.
But you'll be nowhere near the family courts. If you're all those single fathers and single mothers who were getting shafted in the family courts, and it does go both ways, believe me, I've seen it. But they're all getting shafted from what I can tell.
Oh yeah, I know.
And they need to go in there and say, well, if I'm not married, you clearly don't have jurisdiction to hear this matter.
Interesting.
They couldn't possibly have. So their rulings must be void. Those people should appeal those orders as void ab initio, void from the beginning, get-go, void. They're of no effect.
Because, as you just rightly pointed out, the family courts and the family is defined as a family based on marriage.
Well, if you go in there, they will very quickly tell you that the family is based upon marriage, depending on the issue that's in front.
So if you're not a married couple and you're going in there fighting over access and custody and stuff like that, there's no point going in if you're not married.
Well, I'm not saying there's no point in going in, but what I'm saying is that particular court, can't have that jurisdiction if you're not married. They can't. They couldn't have.
So
you show up and you accept a ruling, well, then that's what will happen.
It's a different kettle of fish then, yeah.
But you see, all of this is based on acceptance. You see, the most important part of the Constitution is what do they call themselves? I knew you said the Freemasons, but they're not. Well, maybe they were, but it was the Law Reform Commission in 1966 into 67. They were doing their damnedest, I was told at the time, to try to get rid of the preamble from the Constitution, or they were trying to suggest somehow it was separate or different or not.
So can you remind the listeners what the preamble of the Constitution is?
The preamble of the Constitution is essentially the part of the Constitution that says we give this Constitution to ourselves. And when you reflect in through the articles of the Constitution, particularly Article 41.11, which says, family, and then there's others, is above reproach. We have superior rights and testament, superior, invincible rights, in fact, in the direct literal translation, higher than any statute law. And when you look at man's reason and the private property rights, all of these things that are in there, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the intention of the drafters of the Constitution was to improve our lot as a people. Mick, here's where the Bunreagan and Hearn 1937 Constitution came from. It came from the famine. What happened in the famine, the so-called famine, it wasn't really a famine, of course, it was a Holocaust or a genocide. But, that's when the Irish Republican Brotherhood began, and that's when they started to plan and to plot, and, eventually it came to fruition with the Irish Republican Army and all of those people who got involved, coming them on, and all of these groups. 1916 came about because of that. Because of that treatment of the Irish people being, effectively starved to death on their own land, evicted from their own dwellings. And yes, there was a whole load of argy-bargy, and eventually the 1919 Constitution, then the 1922 so-called Free State Constitution, and then the 1937 Constitution. But threaded through all of them, there is that one single notion that a man living on land with his family, we are essentially the source of all authority, because there can be no other source other than it's God, then man, and then our collective societies that we construct after that. That's the way it works. And the collective societies we construct, be it a bridge club, a snooker club, or a government, none of them can supersede the rights of the Creator. And we are the creator of these groups.
Yeah, the family.
End of, yeah.
Can I ask you, in Article 41.1.1, can that offer any families protection against being evicted from their homes?
Absolutely.
How can it though? How can you get a court to listen to you?
Utilise it. So, for example, you could write to somebody, depending on who you needed to write to, for example, and you could let them know, under this article here, I'm sidestepping or waiving or whatever you want to say, whatever terminology, depending on the situation, I'm waiving X, Y, and Z. Under this clearly is my right to do so. Because I've said to people who said, no, nonsense, you can't do that, and I've said legal people, and I've said, okay, tell you what, you tell me what Article 41.11 is doing in the Constitution then if we the people can't access it.
I mean, my reading of that article, Vin, right, is that if you're a family, your rights as a family supersede every single law in this country. right? Statute law I'm talking about, acts and stuff like that, legislation, right? So if you go into a court...
That's the first thing we have to do is stop calling legislation law.
Yeah, it's not law, it's legislation, folks, yeah. So, you're getting dragged into court by the bank, say they want you out of your house because you've defaulted on your mortgage through no fault of your own, because we all know what went on, 10 years ago in this country, right? Now, they're trying to get you out of the house, but they have to use legislation. The order that's getting signed is a legislative order asking you to hand up possession of that house. Article 41.1.1 therefore should have the right to tell their order to go and take a run and jump. Is that correct?
Sort of. Not entirely correct, but I mean...
that's my reading of it, Vin. That's how I see it.
But I'm also suggesting, look, we the people are supposed to honour our contracts to each other and even to these so-called entities.
Oh yeah, I get that, Finn, yes. I mean, a contract is a contract at the end of the day.
That's why I developed, as you know, the official offer process, to say to people, look, I'm going to pay the maximum. Here's everything I got coming in. If it's dole, whatever it is, here's what I got. Here's my incomes, here's my outgoings, and I'm sending the remainder to the bank. And that's me remaining in honour. Yeah,
you're trying to pay your mortgage. You're doing your level best to pay it.
Absolutely.
And I don't live at the same time.
Free houses, because people like me and you and whoever, we built all these houses and we needed to get paid so we can go feed our families.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting all houses need to become free or some utopian nonsense like that. Do you know what I'm saying?
I mean, I think one of the biggest problems in this country, and same as well in the UK and maybe even in America, was at the beginning of this so-called truth movement, if you want, that's been going on, say, for the last 20 years, people waking up and all.
The search for truth.
Yeah, the search for truth, right? A lot of people, I think, got it into their heads years ago because there was an awful lot of documentaries saying how money was created, fiat currency and stuff like that. It's created out of thin air and stuff like that. So people were getting into their heads then, the banks were creating money out of thin air and,
I keep saying to people, what the hell did you think it was created out of?
Yeah.
Of course it's created out of thin air. It's conjured into existence.
Well, I understand that, but people were getting it into their heads then. They were saying to themselves, well, the bank didn't have the money in the first place, so I'm not paying them now.
It's worthless, but it's not worthless.
And this is the problem, isn't it? People saying, well, I'm not going to pay the banks at all.
No, I don't agree with that. I think you should be paying, but I think you should be paying your level best. Because, therefore, then your word is good. You see, I mean, the way people, and, who doesn't know... when you meet somebody that if their word is no good, then they're no good. Your word is your bond. That's what gets you admiration in social circles. Yeah. That's what keeps you friends. If you tell your friend you're going to do something, you go and do it. Reliability, dependability. And it's a reasonable assumption because we want to get on with each other. We want to live our lives and we want to be happy, fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
And this idea that, screw the banks, I don't go along with that.
No, I don't go along with that myself. So what I'm saying is, with all this kind of stuff that was online years ago, documentaries about how the Federal Reserve operates and stuff like that, fractional reserve banking, and I think a lot of people back then were getting into their heads of saying, well, the banks are pulling a big scam here, so I'm not going to pay them anything at all.
No,
and try and get out of it that way by saying to the bank, can you prove that the money existed in the first place? No.
But you see, that's not really the issue. As I said, it's not the issue because, and I've said this to a lot of people, say, well, why were you paying your mortgage for 10 or 15 years if that was the case?
Yeah. And they were happily paying their mortgage for 10 or 15 years prior to this crash.
Of course. But the figures also show that this idea of strategic defaulter does not exist because we the people were always paying our way. 99.99% of people paid their bloody mortgages through the Celtic Tiger. So that implies we are an honourable people and we honour our commitments. So for the media to be suggesting that somehow people who didn't or couldn't pay, excuse me, got the hiccups, their mortgage, are somehow placing a burden on other people, that's a despicable, deceptive thing to say, because it's simply not true.
Yeah.
You hear the same thing for the so-called TV licence. Oh, if you're not paying your TV licence, other people have to pay for you. Well, that's a scam as well, because TV licence, as long as I can remember, has been voluntary, as is income tax, believe it or not. People don't realise that taxation is voluntary. And I regularly quote Josephine Feely from when she was the head of the Revenue Commissioners.
She said it herself, didn't she?
In her McGill Summer School talk, she said exactly that.
But, that's a strange word, voluntary, in relation to income tax, because, as you rightly point out, and that lady did state that, because I think I've seen the video, or I've seen information about it somewhere where she did say that income tax is voluntary compliance.
It has to be voluntary, because if it's not voluntary, then it's involuntary, and if it's involuntary, that means you're a slave.
But, I mean, Ben, no one volunteers to pay income tax. It's taken at source.
Oh, no, they do. It's crazy, but they just don't realise it. I put it this way, when you define slavery, most people would say, okay, if somebody is 100% taking the product of your labour, you're a complete slave, as in you are 100% enslaved.
Yeah.
And I regularly say to people, well, at what percentage does that fail to be slavery? I mean, if they're taking 1%, you're still enslaved for 1%.
Yeah.
So it's not enslavement, it's actually voluntary. Just most people don't understand how to volunteer or how to not volunteer, rather. And what happens is, you see, then they say, well, we'll take you to court, and they don't actually prosecute you for not paying, they prosecute you for failure to pay.
Failure to perform on the contract.
Different thing, you see. You got to watch the words, folks. They're wordsmiths, these people, and they're very, very deceptive with their use of language. So, I mean, it's real simple, though. I mean, again, I'm not suggesting people shouldn't pay taxation or whatever. What I'm suggesting is that it is voluntary.
Yeah,
and they say it is. I mean, feel free to ring the revenue commissioners, folks, and ask them.
What if you rang them and they did, yeah, and it's just for argument's sake, if you ring them tomorrow and say, listen, is tax voluntary compliance, they tell you, yeah, and say, well, I don't want to volunteer anymore, what are they going to say then? They're still not going to give you back your money, are they?
I'm not saying they're going to give it back, but it may mean you don't have to provide any more to them. Now, at the same time, I mean, other people talk of civil and civic responsibility.
Yeah, you see, I
agree with some of that as well.
Yeah.
So, but I think, if we had developed an app where we, the people, had an app in front of us, and at the time of year to pay taxes, we decided, well, what state is my community in? And we apportion, let's say you're going to pay, I don't know, $5,000 taxes in the year. And you have all the different sections like Garda Síochána, roads, schools, hospitals, etc., public transport. And you can apportion, well, I'll give $1,000 to the trains, I'll give $1,000 to the local school because I've got children, I'll give $2,000 to the hospital, and I'll give the remainder for parks and services.
At least you know where your taxes are going.
Then you'd know absolutely where it's going.
Well, Vin, listen, I have, unfortunately, it's 9:50. I've come up to the very end of the show. We could stay here for another 2 or 3 hours talking, Vin, we really could. But listen, I really want to thank you for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on again, Vin.
You too, Mick. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
But listen, I'll talk to you again very soon. You take care, all right?
My God bless.
All right. Thanks very much, Vin. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that was Vincent Byrne from People's Internet Radio. Always a pleasure to have on the show. He's an absolute gentleman of a bloke. If you're in trouble with your mortgage, folks, go on to People's Internet Radio, check out Vin B on Facebook, and just have a look at the kind of stuff that he's posting. He's not offering any legal advice, he never does, but what he is offering is, or what he does put out there, is just information that he finds online, and it's not information that he makes up. This comes from the Constitution, it comes from the court's own paperwork, it comes from their own writings. So it's not as if he's making any of this stuff up, he's just passing on the information. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed tonight's show, and I hope to be back in the hot seat next week. So until next week, hang on there a second. Until next week, folks, remember this is the world you don't know. And remember, the world is full of great people. If you can't find one, be one. Until next time, talk to you all again soon.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waking humanity, one soul at a time. This is the World You Don't Know radio show with your host, Nick O'Connell.